The push for recreational marijuana in New York may be on the back burner after the state's governor dropped the legalization proposal from the state's budget. This comes weeks after a group of black lawmakers moved to block the governor's proposal unless people of color are guaranteed a share of the potentially $3 billion industry. Here's how Governor Cuomo described the plan back in January.
Legalize adult use cannabis, stop the disproportionate criminal impact on communities of color, and let's create an industry that empowers the poor communities that paid the price and not the rich corporations who come in to make a profit.
But the group of black lawmakers says that Cuomo's proposal could perpetuate racial inequality. The bill would require sales license applicants to already have the land, building, and equipment needed for their businesses. Now, if legalization is going to happen in New York, it will have to be passed as a regular piece of legislation, which could make things a lot tougher. Joining me now is one of the reporters behind that story, New York Times reporter Jeff Mays. Jeff, thanks so much for being here. This is such a fascinating issue to me because we're talking about the inception of what could be a multi-billion-dollar industry here. At the start of the session, it seemed like recreational marijuana was a sure thing for New York. What happened?
Well, I think a lot of advocates had pushed the legislation, calling for it to help rectify a lot of social injustice, the sort of inequalities in terms of who had been arrested for using marijuana. And that changed a little bit. A lot of these black lawmakers, in addition to the social justice aspect, wanted to see economic justice as well. That meant giving people of color licenses to sell marijuana and making it easier for them to get into the industry.
So what extra steps will have to be taken if legalization is to get done here before the end of the session?
Well, right now it is not in the budget, and the governor has moved on. The session ends in June, so there still is time to get it done, but it is going to be a little more difficult because it is going to have to voted on as an individual item as opposed to part of a package. Legislators now say they're still willing to discuss it, but right now it doesn't look like it's going to be in the budget.
So far, 10 states plus D.C. have legalized recreational marijuana. What steps have they taken to try to rectify some of these historic imbalances when it comes to drug arrests and prosecution?
Well, in New York, a lot of the legislators have mentioned that other states have not gotten it right, and that's why they want to do it right this time. They want it in the legislation in terms of who gets to benefit economically from selling marijuana. And the governor has said, well, that's a little too specific. We should do that after and put that into regulatory form. But there is a real push right now to actually see that in the legislation.
Well, what proposals do New York lawmakers want to include that other states are not looking at?
Well, they're looking at making sure that people can get licenses to sell. People other than the big medical marijuana firms, which now have a leg up because they already have the facilities, they already have licenses to do that. They also want to make sure that there are some reparations to communities that have suffered in terms of economics, jobs, other sort of things that can just right some of the wrongs that have occurred over the years.
And so is something similar here in New York, then, is what they're looking at?
Right, absolutely. I think there's a push now, not only in New York, but it's also been an issue in New Jersey to make sure that communities that were unequally impacted by marijuana enforcement now get to benefit if it is made legal.
I mean, these are, as we were talking about before during the break, systemic issues that we are looking at with implications potentially for decades to come. Explain just the sort of context here and the significance, because when you look at other industries, say Silicon Valley, that's an example where you now have an attempt to try to rectify some of the imbalances, but it is definitely an uphill battle.
Right. Well, in New York, it's estimated that marijuana would be a $3 billion industry. And the tax revenue from that would be around $800 million for the city and state. So we are talking about a large sum of money. And so the question is, if you don't get in on the ground floor, if you don't have people who are not big medical marijuana firms, so there's an issue now. And the governor's legislation would require some of the things that benefit big marijuana firms already. And so legislators, especially black lawmakers in New York, are pushing to make sure that individuals will be able to get licenses to be able to sell smaller amounts of marijuana.
So while we have you here, I'd like to ask you about your new piece out today in the Times about the new Guinness World Record holder for tallest politician.
Right.
Tell us about the 6'10",
Yes.
6'10" Robert Cornegie Jr. and the process he went through to get his record.
Pretty tall guy. You know, he played basketball for St. John's, former professional basketball player. Went through this grueling process where he had to be measured by 3 different doctors on different times.
Wow,
so
really?
Took around 12 hours.
12 hours?
12 hours.
Well,
And
how
then
long does it take to measure someone?
Well, if you're 6'10".
Yeah, I guess so.
So they had to go through this grueling process, submit everything to Guinness. So he is now certified as the world's tallest politician. But there are already challengers. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from around the country saying, my politician is 6'11", my politician is 7 foot. So, yeah.
See, you learn something every day here on Red and Blue.
Absolutely.
Jeff Mays, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.